this. Let me find the slideshow. There it is. Okay, hold on a second now. So now it's not showing up my screen. There it is. Okay. Okay. And you will notice a few things here, some familiar images in our slideshow, but then some new ones. We've been experimenting with some new tools and be happy to talk about those as we get into it, but hope you enjoy what we have to present here. So this is what we're aiming to achieve today, and those are just target numbers for how much time we'll spend on that. You know, a lot will depend on what you may want to talk about or interject with yourself as we go along. It's meant to be a discussion, conversation, as much as a presentation. Yeah, so you know, this is kind of touching on the question of, you know, why investment readiness matters. And I think for this group, you know, there's not much of a ground to cover there. I think most people here understand that you know, not only are there pieces that have to be put in place to, you know, attract public or private funding, on the one hand, but in particular to the Redwood region, you know, being ready to readiness also involves, you know, the back end work of being prepared to absorb funding that you may actually secure coming in. So those are some of the reasons that you want to understand more deeply the items of feasibility studies, pro formas, and funding readiness. So that's why we're talking about this, and again, aiming to bring this a little bit more mature to the November 5th convening in Lake County. These are the subjects that we're going to cover, and we're just going to get right into it with Xenia covering feasibility studies and Tracy taking on the financial pro formas. In the event that Tracy's technology goes on the blink, we'll be jumping in to back her up because she is up in the mountains. So with this, I'll pass it over to Xenia to talk us through the nonprofit feasibility item, and I'm going to keep clicking the screen or the slides, I guess. Xenia, so you just give me a nod or some kind of comment like ready to go.
Sounds good. Thank you, Josh, and thank you everybody for joining us today. It's a small group, so as Josh mentioned, you know, these materials will go online and will be available for everyone in the region to use. So we've prepared some templates that we will share in a link, and we'll also send them your way, and we'll have them on the website. So if anybody in the future is, you know, needing those resources and you can point them to, that's where they will be. The templates are really meant to be pretty concise and easy to use, just to get people's, you know, project proponents' minds kind of set to make sure we are checking all the boxes. So you are our working group, and some of you or all of you may be great experts in these subject matters. So we are definitely looking for that conversation, and you, you know, expressing maybe your experiences with some of these type of efforts as we go along. So we're going to talk about feasibility studies and really focusing on the nonprofit sector, because we realize that nonprofits are a big component of this effort. So feasibility study framework in general, we of course want to know what our project is as a step one. So we want to be focused on our sector. What is our mission? What is the geographic scope that we will be working with? You know, determine the name convention so that people get to know our project in the region, and have a leadership set for our project. Step two that we want to take is the market analysis. So really understanding who are our beneficiaries, what is the demand for that kind of service that we're proposing, and also being realistic and thinking about the problems that we might encounter. Financial assessment is really important step, and Tracy is going to dive into financial performance for us a little bit later in this presentation, but truly understanding our revenue sources as well as making sure that we account for all of the expenditures. Risk evaluation is important, and even more so is important in developing the strategies to mitigate that risk. So always thinking about if the risk actually occurred, how do we pull this project through? How do we pivot? And of course, as we start thinking about campaigns and fundraising, understanding the impact and having some clear measures to describe the impact that our project is going to have in the region. So thinking about an example of a challenge, say your organization is already operating, it has outgrown its capacity, and it needs to, for example, have a new building constructed to be able to continue to deliver your mission. So before we dive into fundraising activities, what we are talking about here is doing a feasibility study and really thinking about what it will take for our organization to scale up to that larger project, what staffing needs we'll need to have as part of that project, and also who will be our supporters and how are we going to get that additional funding. Next. So what is a nonprofit feasibility study? It's an assessment tool that we're talking about here. So it's essentially a survey where we can have some insights that we gather from our collaborators in the community. We want to think about the people who are maybe already supporters of our project, those who may be future investors, but also think about competing interests and those who may just be involved in the community but may not be a founder, but what are their perspectives and how do they perceive our project. So we want to be making our decisions based on real information. And so gathering this data ahead of the project is going to enable us to have that data-driven decision-making and also develop better strategies. So the key benefits of engaging in this proactive feasibility study before we actually dive out there and start promoting our concept of either starting up a new nonprofit or expanding programs or a specific project is that we gather feedback early and we learn from it. We build early support. So we're kind of starting our campaign before we actually start the campaign. And we also set informed goals. So based on the research that we are doing, what are our expectations and realistic expectations as to how much funding we may be able to raise for this cause? Josh. So those additional strategic advantages are campaign case development. So as our surveys come in and we learn this information, we are able to create a more compelling case for our campaign and really target those messages. It also gives us the early ability to work with our donors and really make them feel as part of the project and the effort by getting their opinions early and potentially including and twisting our program to respond to those. So when do we want to conduct feasibility study? This concept here is really for any significant project that a nonprofit may be thinking about. So it may be a new mission that you're establishing, expanding a program, or needing to raise capital for a significant expenditure, such as, for example, building infrastructure. Next. So your capital campaigns, raising your funding, the most common use for those campaigns is for projects that have identified specific amounts and specific time period, so we can target that campaign to a specific goal for such project that we're trying to achieve. They're useful for major investments because we want to make sure that our fundraising is continuous and is sufficient to reach our goals. And of course, the projects that are multi-year in duration, because we don't want to fund our project only halfway through and not be able to continue with our work to reach our goals. So some of the thoughts around program development, we may want to do a feasibility study like that when we are thinking about a new program and really thinking about the fit with the mission of a new program. So it's useful to get those insights from your supporters and your collaborators on how this new program might impact the work that you're already doing. Also, for cases where there is program expansion and scaling the program to perhaps a larger scale. And of course, for major funding initiatives where we know that the donor relationship and that early campaign is going to be really valuable for us. Risk mitigation is another way in which we can use these feasibility studies. It allows us to gain those early insights into the project. And before we actually dive with full-on campaign, be able to have some real data and real knowledge of how the community is going to react to our project. And next steps, with kind of given this concept, what could you do? Some of the projects in the region, may have already done this. There may be some folks that are still kind of on the verge of bringing their project or their idea. So we recommend that you evaluate the readiness of your project and your organization to take on this step. So once again, who are the leaders? Who would be the board? Who are those supporters? That we also recommend considering engaging a consultant, just because if you bring somebody that is an independent party, they may be able to record more open responses and bring better data for your information. And also, nonprofit activists usually tend to be very passionate about their ideas, so it's good to have somebody maybe with another perspective, being able to just truly do this feasibility study and identify the strengths and the risks in the efforts. And of course, these studies allow us to develop that early strategy as we think about taking these large initiatives. So with that, I'll hand it to Tracy to talk about performance, and then we'll talk about project readiness after that.
Thank you, Zena. Tracy Fuller here from RGS. I've already introduced myself. I just want to add a high-level thought before I get into the details of pro forma financial planning. We're trying to target this information to the November 5th meeting and to the actual project proponents. A lot of you are already familiar with this information. You're not really the ultimate customer for some of this information, but we're looking for some feedback about this and hoping to refine what we're going to do on November 5th based upon the feedback that we get today in reaction to this. So keep that in mind as I proceed along. So pro forma financial planning, and as we've said, we're focusing on nonprofits. As you all probably know, these are forward-looking financial statements. They have to be based upon assumptions and estimates, but they're a critical tool for securing funding, both from grantors, investors, and they're really critical for strategic planning. After the grants are awarded, there are still some specific projects that require additional funds. So where are those additional funds going to come from? Potential investors, perhaps other grants, perhaps loans. I don't know, but all of those other types of individuals or entities who might be willing to provide additional funding, pro formas are going to be very important because scrutiny is likely to be more rigorous. Proformas can be technical to produce. We've provided a link to a template. It's got many, many tabs. It might be intimidating to someone who's never seen a business plan or something like that. But although they're technical, RGS is here to help. We can help with this element of it, and we're willing to work with individuals to some degree who may need a little bit of help or to be pointed in the right direction. Like I said, some of the project leaders might not have sufficient experience to take on this kind of work. So what's a proforma? It's a planning tool. It's funding support, strategic assessment. As a planning tool, it's going to project financial performance over several years, usually 3 to 5, based upon the assumptions and estimates. But most angel investors, for example, would want to see 5 years at a minimum. Funding support is critical for securing grants and investments by demonstrating organizational potential. And the proforma is the place where that organizational potential is communicated in the language of dollars. And that's important to investors and grantors for that matter. The strategic assessment outlines expected revenues, expenses, and cash flows so that a prospective investor can make an informed decision with respect to your project. There's 3 essential statements that every proforma is really going to be required to have. A statement of activities. Of course, that projects revenues and expenses. It's similar to a for-profit income statement. The statement of financial position, which forecasts assets, liabilities, and net assets at a future point in time, similar to a for-profit balance sheet. And the statement of cash flows, which projects cash movement and identifies funding gaps. And in the nonprofit world, that's a really, really critical statement because some grants are on a reimbursement basis. Some grants are granted in advance of work. And knowing when you're going to get money, when you start out with probably no money, and when you're going to incur your expenses and have to pay your bills is super, super important. I don't need to tell you guys all that, how important cash flow management is in the nonprofit sector. Pro forma statement activities. The statement of activities will include revenue sources and expense categories. Revenue sources like contributions, grants, program service fees, special event income, investment income, in-kind contributions. And expense categories can be very different from one organization to another, but they're going to capture the program expenses, specifically the mission-based program expenses, management in general, and of course, fundraising expenses, if there is such a thing. Most of you probably know that grants coming out of the state of California or the federal government will usually have a set amount for management and general expenses. And so that needs to be considered within the context of what's left for the actual program expenses, or how much is the grant and how much do we have for program expenses? And then can we actually take less than the administrative allotment that the grantor has issued? And that's kind of important because in a small nonprofit, sometimes that's a place where money can be transferred, or budget, I should say, can be transferred and used for program expenses because you don't have as much overhead as a bigger, more perhaps bureaucratic or established organization. The goal being, of course, to effectively manage funds to support the mission, not maximize profits. We've put just a little visual here of what a statement of activities structure would look like. You all, I'm sure, are familiar with this, but we wanted to provide a template link to the template that I referred to earlier. And that's really targeted for anybody who would benefit from building a more robust pro forma than they perhaps already have. Some of the financial estimates that we saw come through the grant submission stage were very excellent, and some were a little thin. So this is one that is very, very built out, and it's a little bit focused on profit, but if you just focus on the things that are relevant, and I can drive somebody into the things that are more relevant, it actually populates all the other reports, the 3 reports that I mentioned earlier. So it's kind of a handy tool in that respect. You don't have to build every single solitary thing uniquely. You really just kind of have to start out with what are your revenues and expenditures, and what do you think your cash flow is going to look like? And you'll get these sort of canned reports out the back end. It's in an Excel format, by the way. So, statement of financial position. Assets, liabilities, net assets. I referred to this as sort of a balance sheet of sorts. The assets, of course, are what is the nonprofit going to own? Cash, property, equipment, other tangible resources. Subtract out liabilities. What does the nonprofit owe? Accounts payable, grants payable, any long-term debts, anything like that. And of course, that equals the net assets, the difference between the assets and the liabilities. And that's where you're going to have an equity section, and that equity will generally be categorized by donor restrictions. Statement of cash flows. There's usually 3 components to this. It is designed to project cash movement so that a project manager can manage the liquidity and identify gaps. Investing activities, financing activities, and operating activities are critical components of a cash flow management report. Investing activities will be cash from purchasing or selling assets or investments. Financing activities might be cash from debt, loans, or other financing sources. And of course, those would go to fund the operating activities, which is the funding required for the mission-related and day-to-day operations. When a project proponent wants to get down to the business of creating their pro forma, they're going to have to work through some steps. Best to start with reviewing any historical data. There might not be any, but you can analyze past performance based upon things that you do know of similar agencies or people who've been in the, or entities that have been in the space before, and establish some assumptions. Evaluate whether or not they're realistic, and provide you with a reasonable baseline from which to move forward. It's important to define the assumptions very carefully and be very transparent about it. You want to define assumptions around funding, events, staffing, economic conditions, and probably several other things that I won't go into right now, but it would kind of depend upon the project. And of course, project revenue. It's very important to have some revenue modeling done, and try to identify in a nonprofit, try to identify any giving patterns or trends to forecast donations and grants, et cetera. And if there's going to be sort of any kind of a sales component, the nonprofit's going to actually sell something conceivably, then that kind of multi-year revenue modeling can have a lot of value. Forecasting and development.
Sure.
Important to forecast expenses, project cost by distinguishing fixed expenses from variable expenses, and categorize all of the expenses by function. A pro forma template will drive someone into doing that. Those will allow for pro forma statements to be developed. As I've noted, there's a spreadsheet template link in the PowerPoint here, and spreadsheet templates are widely available. Some you can buy. So, and sometimes these things get thought of or characterized as business plans, but there are several specific for-fee templates available to the nonprofit world, and there are a few pretty good free ones. So I'll just share that little tidbit. And then, of course, it's very important to maintain transparency. Once you've launched your nonprofit, review regularly with your board, your senior staff, to track the progress that you're making financially and against your mission and adjust the strategies as needed so that you can make sure that you don't run out of funding, that you have the cash flow that you need as you move forward, and that the financial piece of your project management is always at the forefront of everybody's thinking. Success factors. There's many success factors, but some key success factors that we wanted to draw out was to be sure to have realistic assumptions. I mentioned historical data. It helps when seeking an investor if you have current market conditions embedded in the information that you're providing so that you can increase your level of credibility. It has to be, your pro forma should be reviewed, adjusted, regular updates, and shared with others. And you ought to do that quarterly at least. And of course, board engagement is very important and would involve your leadership in the planning process for buy-in and strategic alignment. The place I wanted to kind of wrap up was it really starts with securing going after the funding with some confidence, know what your project and your project needs are, be able to articulate them clearly, present, and part of that is presenting clear financial projections to grantors and investors. They're not, a grantor will give you a little bit more leeway, an investor will be rigorous, as I mentioned earlier. So you want to make sure that you understand your material well and that you're prepared. Make informed strategic decisions using data-driven insights to guide your organization's future. And you need to, once somebody gives you some money, you need to demonstrate fiscal responsibility. There are standards, there is rigor, and the farther away your grantor, in other words, state and federal, the more rigorous it is. Somebody who's giving you money at a local level, like a local city, for example, will not be as rigorous as the federal government or the state government. Both of those entities do, very careful auditing, and so. You want to show your collaborators your commitment to financial stewardship, and you need to do that from the beginning and all the way through the conclusion of your project. Pro forma statements are more than numbers. They're your roadmap to sustainable impact and organizational growth. And I just want to give a little shout out here to Ross, who's a banker and a lender, who probably could have done this presentation better than me every day of the week because he lived in that world for a long time. So your feedback, Ross, will be welcome. Thank you. And that I'll hand it back to Josh.
Okay, thank you, Tracy. That was very well done. And I did see a note from Amanda in there that we'll have to revisit with her after regarding the November 5th event. But now the question about, is your project investment ready? And I think this one was covered. I think that the two items that were presented, the feasibility studies and the pro formas, were foundational pieces that would help meet the checklist here, with regards to the vision and the strategy, your financial readiness. Do you have the documentation to back up the case? Do you have the right people in place with your operations? Are you in compliance with all relevant legal items, especially if you're looking at a build project, an infrastructure capital project, site control permits, things like that? Are you well targeted onto your impact metrics? And do you have the necessary resources or understand what those are to make the project a success? So this is a nice checklist that I think folks can reference in going forward. And I think we wanted to just call out the opportunity that's in front of us and the rest of the state again, which is the round 2 of this implementation funding. I think it's been pretty widely circulated, but we'll just kind of step through our understanding of the program at the moment. There's a remaining $53 million from the earlier total of 123 million that was budgeted for the program. And there are, these key pillars about that are, supporting sustainable and equitable economic growth, investing in workforce for future sectors, and creating attractive environments for job creation and strengthening the innovation economy. The first phase has been out and awarded, and then we're now looking at round 2 with a November 5th submission deadline. There are pre-application questionnaires and then a full application coming again in January. So these are the notice of intent, pre-application questionnaire, and the full application deadlines. So these are the categories of projects that we all well know. They're looking for ready to go projects for the implementation round. Essential requirements are strong project foundation, great team and partnerships, and strategic alignment with regional plans, and now with the state economic blueprint. So these are all important materials to have if you're going to go forward. Many of the people in the catalyst round could be going after this. I know there's been a lot of discussion already. The Redwood region has, I think, the added challenge of finding those sectors that are included in the accelerate or bet categories of the economic blueprint to which the projects could be tied. I think it was a great win for the region to become part of the UCANR round 1 funding and building on that. I think there's some opportunities also with the renewable energy space and with the blue economy that from my perspective make a lot of sense. I've seen some of the other projects in the state that got awarded that built on catalyst funding. So it's not unheard of that somebody could implement their catalyst project or get it started and be competitive in the implementation round. So unless the new governor is going to carry on some version of this Jobs First program, from what we know now, this is the last big tranche of funding for the Jobs First effort. Hopefully they figure out how to continue that. So with that, I'm going to take the chance to highlight a project that I mentioned before that we've been involved with down on the Central Coast that really is centered on advancements that happen with the reuse of the former Fort Ord that have now turned this into a center for emerging technology innovation, particularly electric aircraft and autonomous systems. And the reason I think it's relevant, there's a number of reasons it's worth looking at from the North Coast is, and I'm going to walk kind of through that. So to begin with, the large part of the activity that has led to the award was involved with nonprofit organizations that collectively focused on the opportunity around these emerging technologies. So there was an awareness raised and then multi-year efforts put in place to support what were just emergent companies and link them with workforce programs and infrastructure needs across the region and really build momentum that led to the current moment. And DART is one of the nonprofits that was involved in that. I was involved in founding DART when my role with the Fort Ord Reuse Authority, which was a public agency, redevelopment agency, that oversaw the redevelopment of Fort Ord, came to an end in 2020. So what we did was we noticed a growing market sector in these emerging aviation types, particularly this company here, Joby Aviation, which you see parked in front of this passenger handling vertiport location. This is on the former Fort Ord. It's an old Army airport. And then other uses like agricultural uses, wildfire support and monitoring, and all driven by emerging technologies and advanced batteries, FAA regulations, and the state's interest and really the global interest in climate adaptation. All of this was really founded on a foundation that goes back decades. Really, the closure of Fort Ord happened in 1994. There was a major DoD base realignment and closure, BRAC, it's called, and so there was a special district that was set up to oversee the redevelopment that was called FORA, the Fort Ord Reuse Authority, and through that funneled substantial public investment, federal and state money, and then with all of the intent to clean up the former Army base to have it become a center of new educationally oriented communities. So Cal State Monterey Bay is in the center of Fort Ord, and there's now about 6,000 new housing units either built or permitted to grow around the campus. And really the dream was always that there would be not only the campus, but there would be campus associated innovations that would drive private sector jobs growth. And I think that's, if I look at Arcata and the investments going into Cal Poly Humboldt, I think there's if you take a long view, the future there has great potential. So I think it's a great case study in how the university-centered innovation can really drive community economic development. And I think another point here is, this foundation that from 94 to 20 was largely driven by, public dollars on the remediation and the infrastructure investments, and then private in the housing side. So of course the universities were public funding as well. Since early 2000, when this technology started coming to life, Joby Aviation, which was founded in the hills above Santa Cruz, started growing. The federal government had taken an interest in addressing this question of what modern airspace management looks like through the NASA Ames Center in Moffett Field, and it has set up a test infrastructure out in Hollister. So if you know Hollister, it's a rural area south of Santa Clara. And there's just a little GA airport, General Aviation Airport, that was rather underutilized. And they went there because of those characteristics, as well as its proximity, of course, up to San Jose. But these early steps were taken. Other actors came in and took this Inside Up Solutions is a private entrepreneurial venture that was looking to pilot some FAA programs, and then early partnerships were formed. So these are all kind of the kernel steps that built up into where we have come. So one of the entities I mentioned, DART, other entities, including the Monterey Bay Economic Partnership, and now a new entity called the Monterey Bay Tech Hub have been formed. The private sector was building on the side along the same way with Joby's growth. The universities played a role with an interest in drone education and bringing an annual event called Drone Camp to the region. And all of that sort of built momentum with the support of philanthropy, program revenues, in-kind contributions from local agencies, and targeted state grants to kind of raise the capacity and the readiness of the region to move into the current moment. So really there are, important steps that were taken. Like I mentioned, the industry growth, university partnership. Citrus is a UC aligned for campus program called Computers and Information Technology Research in the Interest of Society. So that's UC Santa Cruz, Merced, Davis, and Berkeley. And they've become a really strong partner launching an aviation research endeavor. And then really the sort of threading of different funding sources, local, regional, state, public, private, and philanthropy, all have come into play and into mobilizing what is happening now. Some of the big outcomes, that we've been involved in there directly are around workforce development. A big question as Joby started to grow their manufacturing footprint on the former Fort Ord was, how are you going to manufacture airplanes in an area that has no prior aerospace manufacturing workforce? And it was really a question of, this tension of meeting the moment, because as a sort of a startup or a new growth entity, it's kind of hard to say exactly what and how many are needed by when. And those are really important questions for the workforce system to answer. So it was through the involvement of philanthropy that we were able to catalyze an apprenticeship program that really got this ball rolling. And there's been great progress made both through the philanthropy, but now through institutionalizing those training programs with local community colleges and through the programming that the private sector has also adopted. So in the first round of the implementation round, there was a collaborative put together that included DART, UC Santa Cruz, the Tech Hub, the Monterey Bay Economic Partnership, that resulted in a $7.4 million award to expand on the infrastructure needed for these new aircraft types to have a safe place and approved places to operate as they come from just the very earliest stages to now looking to be able to move around from airport to airport. And so the pitch that was made here was aligned with what, the California economic blueprint had in its accelerate sector, which is the aerospace sector, and a focus on these infrastructure investment that would support not only in a single company, but multiple companies, and kind of with the idea of creating an ecosystem of activity that could also become a template for how these types of infrastructures could be employed around the state, as well as engaging community and workforce. So really the idea is to demonstrate in this regional level and then scale throughout the state. So I think that's a great case study in this is now if you go back to the closure of Fort Ord, it's like a 35-year time horizon that brought to this particular moment. And there's other investments that are not captured in the presentation here that I made, certainly millions of dollars from the state university system. The transportation agencies have made various investments to move people around and all of those things. But I think it's the continuity and the long-term dedicated kind of multi-threaded work that has created this particular moment. And nonprofits in particular, I never really had much of a relationship with nonprofits until I got into this really by the public agency that I was now the director of closed by its state regulation. It was set with a sunset date. And so the nonprofit was the most flexible vehicle to continue on this work. And it really has allowed us to be quite nimble down there. And so that work continues, and it's just a really exciting time there. And really the focus on, the community benefit, really tying it to, the jobs that were going to come from this growing, you know, private sector piece, and making sure that we're doing everything we could to provide the pathways for the community members to participate in that growth. And I think, I think the circumstances up there in Humboldt with the offshore wind, it's kind of a little bit of a downer to see what our folks over in Washington, D.C. are doing around this, but I saw that, and I hope that we're able to keep moving on that over a long period of time, because cycles ebb and flow, and I think that that's just got great potential in a similar kind of vein here. So yeah, I think that's what we had planned to share in the presentation side, and then we're looking to get your responses to any of the material that we shared here. And I think with regards to the preparation for November 5th, I know there's, I just want to be clear, we were not actually planning to stand up and present pro formas and feasibility studies in the session. But really, this material is the kind of material that we want to have available for project proponents and kind of a ready library state that they can, have access to. And I think what we're gonna focus, really want to focus on, and Amanda, this is kind of taking your, a lead from your most recent comments, not the ones in the chat, but from our last session, around, really drawing out from the regional plans that have been developed, those kind of really strategic opportunities that we see, and develop that maybe, and certainly in relationship with you all already, but in particular this economic development finance working group, what we see as the biggest strategic opportunities, and how we might best align or think about aligning to making sure that those continue to grow, especially in light of, this long cycle that is in front of us. So having these tools that we presented today would simply make that more readily accessible to project proponents, and just a place to, know where they can get that kind of information readily.
Jump in there, Josh, for a moment. So we are aware of what Ursula's doing, and we believe that we know that that's an invite-only session, of course, and that that there will be a very specific group, which kind of suggests that everybody else will be in our session. And we're trying to bring those attendees into focus so that we can speak to them and be of value to them in a more meaningful way. So that's where I was going with that. Thanks.
Can I just say too, Josh, really quick, that I think your example, I think what's nice about what you've just presented is that it's a real world situation where you talk about how you build on creative and innovative partnerships. And I think that's what's interesting for folks.
Yeah.
Rather than, so Amanda and I were kind of having this side chat, rather than something that seems ambiguous. And I think people want to understand where reality meets the work. And we have a Cal Poly now that has a whole host of new majors coming in. How do we use that as momentum for some really interesting things that are happening in our region? I think that's the things that that would be important to focus on.
Great. That's great feedback. I mean, that's the part to me that's the most exciting about this work is and there's an incredible opportunity really to leverage that. And I've seen progress in my lifetime on that front, you know, especially with this work at Fort Ord, where the campuses have become, you know, they're just great institutions around which a lot can happen. And I think that combined, you know, some of the other cool stuff with like the Lost Coast Ventures, that partnership that they're doing in downtown Arcata, the Innovation Hub, and all of that's really, you know, exciting. You know, you guys have laid it out in the work already. You know, these great sectors. You know, the Great Redwood Trail. You know, I think, you know, for Calder and certainly the tourism side, but also the arts that could be associated with that. And then, you know, I think what, you know, sort of the renewed forestry, the mass timber, the biomass utilization piece, and then the blue economy stuff, you know, that's happening down on the coast there. Those are all, I think, have great potential. And there's a story actually with, you know, I don't know if Marianne covered it too much in her presentation, but this wave powered desalination thing that's happening in Fort Bragg. You know, that's like a really, you know, first of its kind deployment here in California. It's really worth knowing about. So I'll stop talking and invite some more comments if anyone has any. Fantastic. Must have bowled everybody over with the great content. We will make it available as normal on our webpage for this project, and welcome, you know, further reflections that may come after today. And we'll keep working with Lee and Amanda and the others there on our November 5th session. And we're going to get back together when for this group? When's the next meeting of the?
Well,
No,
our expert sessions,
Yeah, go ahead.
our expert sessions will be monthly, right? And then
Yes.
we're gonna do with the group less often until we have a very specific thing for us to work on, so.
Yeah, so we'll get back together. Well, we'll be right about November 5th. Maybe we'll just see each other at November 5th.
I think that probably November, we can call that meeting our expert session and then come back in December.
Okay. Annie,
And I love
you're on,
seeing
you're, okay, there you go. Now you're coming through. It's a little
Yeah.
broken up. There you go. Okay, good.
Yeah, I think it may be my bandwidth. It feels a little broken up too. I was just gonna ask, I love seeing these templates for the pro forma and for the feasibility studies. I think it would be really helpful as well to see like some successful examples, particularly coming from nonprofits or from these types of projects too. So yeah, if you have any that you could point us to, I would love to see this as well.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think a great place to start would be the catalyst projects that were awarded. They've all got, you know, solid budget material. So I would start with that and you know, we can build from there if there's other ones that you have particular interest in or.
Yeah, that's great. Absolutely. I'm looking through this. I just wondered, you know, in particular, following these sort of templates that you have. For sure. Appreciate it.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Wonderful. Thank you all for spending the afternoon with us, and we'll see you November 5th, if not before.
Thanks, RGS.